Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop Sis is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop Sis. Big welcome back to Stop Sis. My name is Denise Walsh, and I have my friend Rachel Timothy here with us. And although Stop Sis, Stop Suffering in Silence is a podcast geared towards all sorts of trauma, and throughout this next year, we're going to talk about every aspect or, tons of different things. We're going to start with Rachel's story. Rachel was groomed at the age of 9 from a coach at her school, and then led into the trafficking world till her teenage years, and then again as an adult. And I know a lot of you are probably like, we want to know her story. And so I'm going to give you 2 resources to listen to learn more about the timeline and how it all worked and that kind of thing, and really deep dive into her story. And one is her book that is called OpenBlindEyes, and the link to that will be in the show notes, the description below. And then we also recorded a podcast on my podcast called Dreamcast that is an overview of her story. And so I'll link her stories down below so you can go on a deep dive and hear a bit about all that happened for, on a more detailed basis. But today we want to talk about human trafficking in general, and specifically the myths surrounding human trafficking. Because to be honest, if you're like me, I knew there was craziness happening in the world, but I certainly didn't know to what degree. So Rachel, thank you for coming today, and of course, sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to blow your mind.
I think you will. Yes. Okay. So the first question I have is, let's start with a working definition. How would you define trafficking?
Okay. So human trafficking is just somebody is sold, period. So whether by force, fraud, or coercion. So if one person sells another person for profit, that's human trafficking. Now, if it is a sexual act that is being sold, so sex or porn, whether it's pictures or videos, that is sex trafficking. And then if it is an underage child, it is automatically child sex trafficking.
Okay. And so really anyone who is someone else is getting paid for their service.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And often people would say that prostitution is potentially a choice, and they're adults and they're making a decision to use their body for money. Tell me what you think about that.
For one, if you're giving that money to somebody else, that's trafficking. That's not prostitution. If somebody is threatening you and giving you like a cut of it, or maybe you won't have a place to live if you don't do it, or they're going to make it to where you can't see your kid. That's the manipulation, the coercion part. And so that's not freedom. And it's not a choice at that point.
Right. I've heard stories, and I'm sure several of our audience has heard stories of people who meet potential boyfriends that then get them into the life, and what they thought was love, or what they thought was kind of a savior coming in to take care of them, turns out to be a brothel situation where they are now owned essentially and have quotas. They get, and you even mentioned where sometimes they're drugged or put on drugs. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned with that.
Yeah. So oftentimes they will purposefully get the victim addicted to drugs so that they need that fix. And the only way they will get that fix is by selling a certain amount of money, selling themselves. But yeah, I mean, and it can be the extreme of where they're being sold daily, or they could be being sold once a month. Like their boyfriend could act like he loves them all the time. And then one weekend out of the month, he makes a lot of money off of them. That's still trafficking. And, you see that person maybe working at a restaurant or working or at a grocery store or at your church or in your school. And it's traumatizing for them. I mean, it's terrible, but from the outside looking in, you would never suspect that they're being trafficked.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, when I think prostitution or trafficking, I think strung out, I think living on the streets, maybe inner city or homeless in the country, living in a trailer with, trash everywhere. But it sounds like somebody could be trafficked and still going to school on Monday or still going to work. Tell us a little bit about what you experienced and how it was for you.
So, I mean, my own experience, starting at age 9 till about 13, 14, I would be hurt not every day. And sometimes it would even go months without anything. But then maybe once a week or twice a week or whatever, I would be sold to somebody, but I would still get to go home. I would act like everything was okay, because of the trauma that a young child is going through, you disassociate. And so even being able to verbalize something to somebody, you can't. And the evil that you're experiencing is above what your brain, especially at 9 years old, can handle. So yeah, I mean, I was still going home. I would stand up and sing specials at church, and people had no idea what the preacher's daughter was going through, because my dad was a preacher. But yeah, my grades never really suffered. I was a good athlete. I had friends. But there was a point in my life where the spark left. And I mean, I remember cutting, I remember having suicidal thoughts, and this would have been in 5th or 6th grade. And so that spark was just gone, and a darkness was starting to fill up inside of me.
So at some point, you became kind of like a shell.
Yeah, exactly. And you become a professional faker, basically.
Because even if you're a shell and you're really not kind of engaging in life, like more like a zombie, you still are showing up. And so people really have no idea what's going on.
And to an extent, I didn't either. I mean, I hurt terribly, and I would have flashbacks pop into my mind. I would have nightmares, but again, nothing that made sense. And so I hurt. And I remember when I started cutting, I was told I was attention seeking. And I thought, "Oh, maybe I am. Like, what is wrong with me?" I didn't know. I just knew I hurt. But real quickly, it seems like it's easier for adults to just put the label of attention seeking than digging deeper to figure out what's really going on.
Right. Because at the end of the day, a healthy, like a healthy mind doesn't think to go there. And so
Right.
something's going on, even
Especially a kid.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So another myth that we have here is that people know they're being trafficked and are trying to get out.
Yes. So this is a myth because a lot of times, for one, you could be trafficked. Let's say you're being tricked into sending a picture or video through the phone, and maybe they manipulate you, or they kind of create a relationship with you beforehand. And so then they use that as blackmail, like, oh, I hear you have a sister. I'm going to hurt your sister if you don't, send me a picture or whatever. And believing that lie, somebody will then send a picture, and that is sold. And they themselves end up in this awful, it's not a relationship, whatever that is, with this person online where they're being forced to send pictures and videos. But a lot of times people wouldn't know to call that trafficking, but it is. Another situation is going back to that boyfriend who just sells them occasionally, or it's kind of similar to a domestic violence situation. You almost sugarcoat it, or you give them excuses, or you make it seem not as bad as it is. Or a lot of the time, people believe trafficking is overseas. Like they don't know the actual definition to know that this is not okay. This is illegal. I'm a prisoner, basically. They don't know to label it that because they have obviously emotions going through their mind, trauma, brainwashing, all the things that are messing with their logical thinking to know that they're actually enslaved.
It's fascinating because when I started talking about this on my social media, I had a friend reach out, and she said that she was dating someone in Germany and he started selling her. And she was told that the money that she was making would go back to her mother.
Mm.
And so she was in this place where she believed that it was for the greater good, and that's part of the brainwashing we're talking about, is that oftentimes victims don't even quite realize what's happening because of the coercion that's going on around them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people would be surprised too at the opposite of that, where Americans will bring in people from other countries, tell them they're going to give their family money and stick them in a spa or massage parlor, you know, and they don't speak English. And I mean, the last town that I lived in was close to 150,000. And we found that there were 8 of those spas with these foreign women who can't get out. One of them was actually located right next to a safe house office. And they knew, and the police know, but nobody can shut it down because you can't find proof. You would have to go in and actually experience, I guess, something. What has happened in the past is the women have been taken out and put in jail for prostitution instead of there actually being legal things done with the men who did it. But I remember being in that safe house office, and of course the rule for that brothel right next door was the men had to shower first. And so we would be in the safe house office and we would hear the shower go on, and we would know one of those women is just about to be raped. And it was awful. And there's nothing, the police, nothing we could do about it.
We're going to do a whole nother episode on that because you're
Yes.
like, how does that even make sense? Like, how is our
No.
knowing that this is happening and they can't just bust through the door and save these women? Like, what is stopping that from actually happening?
One would be they are adults and they wouldn't be able to communicate that they feel unsafe. They have been threatened to where the money is, they believe, going to their family, and their family will die if they don't do what they're told. Shame in other countries is so big. And they threaten to go, get word back to their family that they or tell them what they're actually doing. So many different barriers and things that keep it from being caught and justice being served. It's awful.
That's horrifying. And then
Yeah.
the myth that people are actively trying to get out. And I know when there's a girl here in Michigan who shared her story, and she left her house at the age of 15 because abuse was happening there. And then she got saved by this, of course, older gentleman who ended up being her pimp. And she was a prostitute in our downtown for 20 years and has since gotten out and is now has a nonprofit serving those who are getting out of the life, as she called it. But it took her several times. She went out and she had children that lived with her mother, and she would leave and the life, and she would go home for a few days, but then she would end up coming back. So tell me a bit about how long it takes for somebody to actually get out, and why don't they just leave?
I know. And it's really hard when you haven't lived it to really understand. So they say it's about 12 to 15 times that it takes somebody to be rescued, and then they actually stay out. They don't go back, which is just, it blows your mind. Why would they not want to leave that horrific experience? Well, for one, they have been taught that that's all they're worth. I know for me, there would be times when I would feel like I didn't fit in the normal world anymore. Like I was so hurt, so dirty in my mind. I had no self worth. I didn't feel like I could even go into the grocery store without a panic attack. I didn't feel worthy to be out in this life. And I would watch other people, and I didn't feel like I belonged. And so you had that in your mind. You also knew of girls that were back in it still, and they would often threaten, if you leave, they will hurt one of those girls. And that was a big one for me, because then I already felt like I wasn't worth anything, but those girls were worth something to me. And to sacrifice them, I wasn't wanting to do that. And I was so terrified of these men that logically being able to tell myself they're not really going to do everything that they say. Although I saw it come to fruition many times. But knowing that I needed to get out to truly help anybody ever, that didn't cross my mind. So there were threats. There was the feeling of just worthlessness, the feeling of, would somebody else end up injured because of me? It it's hard to explain the mind games, control, whatever you want to call it, that goes on with a victim. But it's not your logical thinking. And again, if you were to think of it in your own way, like think of your absolute worst trauma and then make a decision right after that, you can't. You're not thinking logically. And when you're in that survival all the time, you're never thinking logically.
Right, right. You're in fight or flight mode all
Yes.
the time. And when you're in fight or flight mode, not only like so your blood leaves your brain and goes to your limbs, but your hormones change, your cortisol is up, and there's like racing thoughts. I mean, it's it's scary. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, if you're living in that way and that's the way your brain is stuck a little bit, your body
Yeah.
is used to that, then even calming down your nervous system to get to a place where you can think logically
Right.
takes time. But yet you're living in this crisis world.
Hmm.
So in order to retrain your brain, you need a new world that you now can start to
Right.
believe
And
in. And that's what's not
oftentimes,
happening.
though, they would show back up. Like you're a huge amount of money for them. And if you leave, they are losing a lot of money. And so they're not going to let you go easily. And so oftentimes I would gain the strength myself to stop obeying, stop doing what I was told, but they would show back up and immediately I'd go right back into obedience. Or I mean, they would threaten my friends, they would threaten my family, like send them text messages. I mean, they were willing to do anything. I knew a lot. I knew a lot of people who were involved too. So information was another thing they wanted to keep quiet. So there's just a lot of angles to
Right,
it.
right. Now, another thing that I think is a myth is that oftentimes we believe, or at least we grow up to believe, that it's of stranger danger, right? Somebody's going to take you and steal you and kidnap you, and that is how trafficking happens.
Mhm.
When in fact, in hearing your story and the stories of your friends and the people that I've gotten to know, it sounds like it typically is not a random person on the subway, but it starts with emotional ties that then lead to the physical ties. And those emotional ties are with people we know.
Right. And I think it's important to say too, like the grooming process, that emotional tie, it's not just done with the victim, but usually the family as a whole. Everybody trusts this person. But yeah, statistically, they say 93% of abuse victims know the abuser. And so that's the same really with trafficking. Familial trafficking is one of the most common types. That or a close friend. But you hear all the time of parents selling their kids for drug money, to pay rent or whatever. It seems like an easy way for them to make cash. And the kid, again, is still going to school, still maybe even a part of the youth group. You'll see them in the grocery stores. I mean, it's not how a lot of people picture trafficking.
Well, and I've read books and heard stories now over the past year of setups in the basement
Right.
of
That's very common.
porn happening and things being videotaped and sent out, and the parents are orchestrating it, or bringing the daughter around to locations, and where that's happening, and then comes back in the car and like, okay, we're going home now. This is daddy daughter time. This is what happens. And what I can imagine is when you're a kid, if this is a part of your normal, you'll have to let me know how you were able to rationalize it in your head. But at some point, you don't fight back because you think, this is normal. This is what we do. And this is how it works. And when I go to this house, this is what we do. And it just kind of becomes like a normal part of your world. Tell me a little bit about how, as a child, if family or people you trust are involved, how does that warp a child's brain?
Well, I mean, you really have nobody you can trust if that's the case for you. And so I think every child is different in how they try to make it okay. It's almost like they create a different world in their mind to seem to make it okay, because every kid wants to be like everybody else. And so whether they justify it by saying everybody goes through this, or they hide it saying, I'm actually like everybody else. I actually don't have to go through this. Either way, they're trying to rationalize it in their brain to where they feel normal.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, our brains are so powerful.
They
And our
are.
brains do want us to fit in. Our subconscious job is to help us fit in with the tribe. And so I can understand how a child's brain would go, well, this is what dads do, or this is what uncles do, or this is and I'm sure too that some of that is being told, this is what love is,
Sure.
and this is how it works, and this is what we do when we go to the doctors, and so it could even be some time before the child even really realizes this is abuse.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes too, I know for me, it was a coach who had trafficked me, but his manipulation with me was that if I told, he would lose his wife, his kid, and his job, which that you would think, oh, well, of course you want to just go ahead and tell. Who cares if he gets hurt? Well, in my mind, I didn't want him to get hurt because of the grooming that took place, the emotional stuff that took place before. So that's what initially was said to me. And then as time went on, shame and guilt and like making it seem like it was my idea. So when you go to try to explain to somebody what's going on, but deep down you think it was actually you think you're going to be the one that goes to jail. I thought that for years, even up until when I was adult. I thought I would be the one that would go to jail.
And especially when oftentimes the girls are. I mean, in the world of
Yes.
prostitution,
Yes.
the Johns, as they call them, the pimps, they're not the ones that are going to jail. The girls are, because prostitution is illegal, but yet they're
Right.
not the ones in charge here. Like
Yep. And then imagine if you're a kid and you see something like an elder of your church come in, or somebody like the mayor, or like these higher up people coming in, your voice doesn't matter. And so I mean, you have no options except to try to buffalo your way through life and act like it's okay.
yeah. Well, and I think we've talked about this before, whereas you are like, something's not right here. Like, this does not feel good. I don't like this. Something's off. But yet when these adults and these people of power are telling you this is fine, this is good, that's
Yeah.
confusing. And then I feel like you don't build that trust muscle within yourself. You don't connect with that intuition. You learn, well, even if I don't think this feels good, or if I don't like this, I'm going to believe them because they're the adult, they're the authority, they're the ones that society tells me to trust. And then growing up, again, that self-trust isn't there.
Right. And you don't see any of those people go to jail. You don't see them get in trouble. So, and that's the thing for kids, you oftentimes see other kids get in trouble. You don't hardly ever see adults get punished for anything.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. Okay. We've got a lot to say about this. So another myth, a myth about trafficking. Let's talk about this. So one myth is that only girls are trafficked.
Yeah. I mean, so I can't say personally that I saw a boy being trafficked, but I know statistically it's happening all the time. I know you hear about it through, like, if they're being trafficked through their phone or through a device or whatever, their pictures are being sold, videos are being sold. That happens often. And I know there's brothels out there with boys. I know for me, what I did experience was boys being trained to be the predator, which to me is abuse too. I mean, that's not okay. So even though they were experiencing trauma, they were having to inflict trauma. Um, and so that's part of it too.
Tell me more about that.
So I mean, you're grooming up the victim, but you're also grooming the next one to take over as far as um, selling and making money. And whether it's your child um, or it's just a family business you want to pass along, I really don't know because I wasn't involved in those conversations. But I watched adult men teaching a boy how to hurt. It was me actually, but um, yeah, I don't understand all of the reasoning behind it because that's not how my brain works, but I just know that that's a thing. And I think honestly, porn does that by itself with these kids and the access that they have to porn. It's grooming them to be a predator as well, because that's what we're taught is normal, but it is a hands-on type thing as well out there. And I think, I mean, that's part of it. They're not being sold, but they're being taught to sell.
Right. Okay. And I can imagine if, coach's son or somebody's family member is saying, harm this girl in this way, that boy is having his own trust, like what the heck is happening in this world. I mean, that's messing with his brain too.
And I don't know that he wasn't sold. He could have been, because there's often times that they put two different trafficking victims against each other. It's sick and it's messed up, and it's an evil that our minds can't comprehend a lot of the time.
No, we often are like, you cannot make sense of evil. And I think we could bang our head against the wall trying to understand it because it doesn't make sense. But the truth is that it is happening to girls and to boys. But then also one myth that you mentioned was that it's not always like young, beautiful children or, cute moms, or I mean, whatever. It's all kinds of people in all walks of life. So can you tell me a bit about what you've seen there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard, but I've also experienced friends of mine who one was paralyzed and in a wheelchair, and she was in a safe house and working to find freedom. But I mean, you never would guess that, but she was being sold. She had a pimp. Another girl that I knew was probably over 400 pounds. I really don't know, but she was severely obese. And she said nobody would believe me when I would tell them what was actually going on because of her size. They laughed at her. And I mean, you can just imagine how that makes you feel. You're not even good enough to be trafficked. That type of a comment was said to her. So it truly can be anybody. It could be even elderly. I mean, I've heard of elderly being raped and sold, and so you have assumptions, and we just need to put the assumptions aside. And when somebody comes forward, don't start with, oh, well, how can that be possible? Always start with believing, because you would never believe what is actually out there.
Right. Right. And again, we can't make sense of crazy. And so
No.
it's not going to make sense to a rational human brain.
Right.
These people are not normal, is what we're learning.
So, and then I want to throw out there too, this whole podcast is stop suffering in silence. We keep saying you can't make sense of crazy. Well, people are not going to say their crazy story because it does sound crazy. And so they suffer in silence. I remember sitting down with Granny. We were at a police station and we were explaining one of the most recent attacks that was done to me. And And it was awful. But I remember the police officer saying, these men will purposefully do crazy stuff to you so that when you go to repeat it, it will sound crazy. I mean, they have a plan. They don't um, leave far from that handbook that these predators use, but that's why one of the reasons they suffer in silence is it is too crazy to comprehend.
And because our minds rationalize it, sometimes we're like, well, maybe it's not that bad. And
Yeah,
maybe they're right. And maybe, because we don't want to live in a crazy world. And so we try to stabilize it as much as we can.
exactly.
All right. And so let's talk about the myth of protecting our kids, because a lot of times, especially when we go to these events and you share your story, one of the, of course, conversations that comes up is from mama bears like myself, who's like, no, how are we going to stop this? And we want to protect our children, and we want them to know, karate, and we want them to get people, or what am I doing? This is my elbow people in the gut, and do all these things and beat the predator. But you brought up a good point when you were at my house and we were doing this roundtable discussion, is that I think physically that's helpful, sure, to build confidence and to help somebody like get to know their body and to build their inner strength. But it's not really the way to protect them. So tell us about how and why we need to really build that emotional strength instead.
Yeah, because I mean, if they've already lost emotionally with the predator, they're not going to fight physically. Even if you've taught them all those protective moves, the elbow, they're not going to put it into practice because they think this man loves them. And so you have to not only teach your kids how to protect themselves physically, but how to protect themselves emotionally. So how to pick up on a sign of somebody emotionally abusing them. Maybe an adult giving improper praise or spending improper amount of time. The emotional ties that go with that that's the first step to the abuse. And really that's the grooming process. So if we can teach our kids how to be safe emotionally around people, then you're going to not probably see them in a position where they're going to have to fight physically, you know?
Right. And I think especially with online,
Mm.
I would imagine, and again, there's probably a ton of different ways this works, but one way that you can get into somebody's heart is by asking for help.
Yes.
And asking, I need your help. Could you do this? Whether it's, you know, help me on a video game or send me $5 or whatever it is, somebody having a hard time and needing your help emotionally draws you in. And I think for a child, that could be hard to discern. And
Right.
so teaching children at boundaries or right from wrong, but then also how can we help them to come to us, to talk to us, to open up that communication if something like that does happen.
Yeah, and when I was at your house, there's a prosecutor there who actually works with child trafficking cases and child abuse cases, and she brought up a point and she apologized to all the moms in the room, and she said, "I'm just going to tell you, none of your kids are going to come to you if they've been abused." And I agree with that. And the reason being, I mean, it could be a number of different reasons, but they could maybe be wanting to protect you. You don't know what the predator has said to them. It could be that they feel ashamed and like they've disappointed you, especially the church culture and what we teach kids, sex is bad. Sex is a sin. Well, as a kid, and you think possibly it was just as much your fault as theirs. Now, I mean, you feel that shame. And so for whatever reason, telling your parent is almost impossible for a kid. And so we talked about how important it is to surround yourself with a healthy tribe, a village of people, to give your kids other options. Maybe they just are scared to see how you're going to respond. They don't want to see you hurt. That was a big one for me. I didn't want to see my parents hurt. And so being able to tell somebody else who wasn't quite as connected, I think is helpful. A friend of mine, She said her kids go to counseling. It's not because anything's happened. It's just because they need to have a safe place to talk. And she jokes and says when they graduate from high school, their gift is a free year of counseling because of, she goes, because of my parenting, Lord knows they need it. But that's true. I mean, we need counseling. We need a safe place. The kids need a safe place to talk where they don't feel like they're burdening us.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was in my therapy days, I was 24 when I started, so they gave me all the teenagers. And so I had a lot of teens that I worked with, and I was working in that mental health, community mental health location for about 5 years. And I saw some kids throughout that entire 5 years. And what I found is that at first they came in because there was some sort of crisis going on. But eventually I just became another supportive adult in their life. And I maybe only saw them once or twice a month, or maybe they were in my adolescent group or my preteen group, but they weren't going through an immediate crisis. They, I just became a part of their community of, people that care and people that listen. And honestly, everybody needs a place to process life, especially kids who are going through tricky stuff at home.
Yeah. So like with our kids growing up, we want to give them a toolbox to be able to use with when hard things happen. And that's a tool in the toolbox that they could learn while they're still at home on how to communicate hard things. And they're going to grow and be a lot stronger adult because of it.
Right. Right. So I've got a few questions about your experience. We talked a bit about the fact that oftentimes we don't even know it, we're being trafficked because we believe it's love, or we, as a child, you just think this is what happens when I go to this place or whatever. Mm-hmm. When did you start to realize that, okay, this is wrong and this is trafficking?
I don't really remember when I put that word together with it, or if it was somebody else who said it to me. But I remember the moment when I realized it was all wrong. And it was when I saw on Facebook where a friend of mine's daughter was spending time with him after school. He was teaching her how to paint. And they had made a post on Facebook with one of her paintings and just said, thank you to, and said my coach's name for helping my daughter after school. And literally every memory, flashback, whatever you want to call it, came flooding my brain. And I knew in that moment that little girl's not safe. Prior to that, I had little bits of understanding, but this will go to show you just how much brainwashing and messed up my brain was from what I went through. I asked my coach to sing in my wedding. And if that doesn't show crazy right there, and he said no. But that I still had in my head that he was a good guy. He made some mistakes in my head, but he was still a good guy until I realized he didn't just have that relationship with me. He had it with other kids too. That's when something needed to change. So
you went, that wasn't until adulthood.
Yeah, I was 28.
Okay. So throughout the years of middle school and cutting and experiencing, you were trafficked until age 15. Is that what you said?
Once I graduated 8th grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so even in high school, there wasn't any sort of connection that this was a problem or this was wrong. Right. You really, again, our brains normalize it. We're brainwashed and told. We'll talk a lot about in another episode about dissociation and how you really do lose time and you don't even quite know what happens until bits and pieces come back. And so our brain tries to protect us. And it wasn't until 28 years old that you really had that flood. And so that's powerful because I think that's a myth. I think the myth is that people know that it's happening and you're trying to get out, and that's just not true.
Well, and I remember I was speaking about a year ago and a woman came up to me and she said, I'm 65. I didn't remember until I was 60 that happened. And, you think, oh, well, lucky her, she went 60 years without remembering. But in reality, she was still dealing with the impact of it and just didn't know what it was from. And I can now look back to those years when I didn't know I had been trafficked, but I was not a healthy person and I was not functioning healthily with other people. Like relationships were not good. All sorts of things were wacko. But I didn't know what it stemmed from because I didn't have the memory.
Right. And it's, there's the book that says your body always knows, there's,
Body keeps the score. Is
yeah,
that the
your
one?
body keeps the score. And so your body, your subconscious knows, even if it's not in your conscious memory. And that's what I have a program that's, about all about self-sabotage. And that's a lot of it, because
Yeah.
you're operating out of the subconscious, even if you don't quite realize it. And so your brain was shifted and you were operating out of this place of lack of trust, of fear, of fight or flight, but yet you didn't even really know why.
Right. Yeah. And in your program, like you'll talk, let's just say about money, and you don't know why somebody, you know, is terrible with money and they don't even know why. But then if they finally dig down and realize, oh, my parents, X, Y, and Z. I mean, a lot of people do it. They just don't know what their behaviors stem from.
Right, right. Okay. And then I know we'll talk about this, I believe, in our next episode, but one of the myths is that justice is served.
Ah.
And I mean, we can talk about what it's like telling family, and the importance of family believing. We can talk about what it's like going to the police and the responses. I'm sure you've gotten different responses from a bunch of different places, which ones worked, which ones were not helpful. And then even the church, you've said you've had churches that you've come forward and said things to, and some believe you and some tell you to forgive immediately without any investigation and keep the perpetrator in the congregation, and you've had a plethora in between. So tell me a little bit about the myth that justice is always served and all we need to do is tell the police and he'll go to jail.
So they say that assault cases, which that's what trafficking, initially basically is the least prosecuted crime that there is. So you already have the barrier of 1% of traffic victims find freedom. And then you're looking at the fact that unless it has the evidence, the DNA, or it was seen by an officer in the moment, you're not going to get justice. And it can be my word against his. I've received awful text messages for years. I mean, just threats, awful, disgusting things time and time again. We give those text messages to the police thinking surely they can track them. They can't track them because it's a different number each time, apparently. There's a lot that you just assume police can do. And, whether there is a bit of corruption involved, which I believe probably every police station has at least one corrupt police officer that can ruin a case. There's also a ton of great police officers who are truly doing the best that they can with what knowledge they have. You also have police officers who've never been trained in what real trafficking can look like. They know the prostitution type, but they don't understand the familial or the person who still gets to go home. And so they've not been trained. So why would they believe what you're saying? And in fact, what the exact words that were said to me was, "You've watched too many movies," from a police officer. So, and if you can imagine the trauma that it takes to share your story, and then the trauma it impacts you with when they don't believe you. I shared my story after being hurt literally that morning, and we called the police right away, and we shared everything. There was evidence all over my house, and instead of them investigating, they called DCFS on me, or CPS or DCS, whatever you call it in your state. I vowed at that point I was never going to call the police again. Why would I? I mean, so, and then oftentimes, like for me, I would call the National Human Trafficking Hotline and I would give them the details, and they would say, "Oh, we are absolutely going to help you. What is the local police?" And we'll contact them. That doesn't help me any. So we basically had hit a moment or a point where we gave up on justice. We're just going to work on keeping me safe, work on keeping my family safe and getting healthier and stronger, because justice just doesn't hardly ever happen.
Gosh, it's shocking, because you think that out of all of the important things in this world, out of all of the, ways that government spend our money or whatever the case may be, that this would be one that would get top priority.
Yeah.
And it keeps getting shoved under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Okay, so we're going to move into healing, because I know we want to end every single episode with a bit of encouragement, because this can be a heavy topic. And I'm sure a lot of minds are blown right now. If you've got any more questions or any myths that you would like Rachel to bust, put those in the show notes below, or I'll put the Stop Sis email in there in case you're on the podcast. There's not an easy way to like leave comments on the podcast. You can email the Stop Sis email as well, and we'd love to hear from you. But you came from this place of cloudiness of, I imagine your brain like confused and unsure of what is true and like, how did you begin the process of unwinding all of that?
Oh, goodness. So for me, I would have to say that God blessed me with some people around me who they could see clearly. Everything was a fog for me. And I remember them literally saying to me, just take that step forward. I know you can't see where it's taking you, but trust us in this, take that next step and take that next step. And it was a blind faith. It really was, because I didn't see hope. I didn't see freedom. I didn't see a life without pain and abuse. And even if I wasn't being abused that day, I was suffering from the flashbacks of being abused. And so every day was a painful fog. And each little step that I took forward, trusting that they were leading me in the right direction, things began to clear a little bit. And I began to see the progress. I could look back and see the progress that I had made when I didn't realize that those little steps truly were taking me somewhere. So I believe that's the importance of not suffering in silence, because when you're in silence and you're in a fog, you don't know which direction to go. You have to say something to somebody so you can have somebody who can see clearly direct you in the right direction.
And I know it wasn't even just the police. Like, it's not like go to the authority to do something. It was like, let's create a community around you. And so you went to ladies at your church. You started telling people in your circle until you found the ones that you really could hold on to.
Yeah. And I think that's important to say too, because not everybody can handle it. Unfortunately, you can tell somebody and you can pick up pretty quickly, okay, this was too much for that person. But don't give up. Don't silence yourself. Just because that person couldn't handle it doesn't mean that the next person can't, so it took me several people. I told over and over and over again. I told over and over and over again, even as a kid. And so many times I was not believed, or it was just brushed under the rug. But finally a breakthrough came and somebody believed and they listened and they got me the help and sent me in the direction that I needed to go. So don't give up in speaking out.
Right. Did you get to a rock bottom or something where you felt like something needs to change? Like, now I'm going to finally try to go get help? Or
Yes. In fact, I was reading in my journal the other day and I wrote, how many rock bottoms are there? Because I had hit so many rock bottoms and I thought, oh, I'd already hit the rock bottom. And then I hit it again and I hit it again. So yes, but the way the trauma brain works, I'd somehow end up right back in a difficult situation until I truly trusted and moved in the right direction.
Well, and I think that's key. You told people until you found someone you could really trust and hang on to their coattails. And that trust is why you were able to take those blind steps of faith outside of what was your comfort zone at that point, because abuse was your comfort zone, whether we like it or not. Right. And so that was your normal. And so you had to, you got to find someone who then you could, build that trust, which was kind of like the bridge outside of.
I'm going to stop you though.
Okay. Keep going.
Abuse was not my comfort zone.
Okay.
But the fear of what could happen outside of it was enough to keep me in it. if that makes sense. So it wasn't that I was comfortable in the abuse, but they had put so much fear in me of, if I come forward, I'll go to the police, or my family will get hurt, or I'll be taken and never seen again. So the fear of, I remember when Granny would tell me, we're going to the police and we're doing this. And in my brain, I thought, I will not live through this. Like, I have been hurt by police. I rationalized in my head all these terrible things that were going to happen. So it wasn't that I was okay with where I was, but freedom seemed scarier because of the steps. And that's what ticks me off so much. The steps that a victim has to take to get freedom and to get justice is insane. It's awful. It's traumatizing. It's scary. It's debilitating. All the words. And so you have no idea how hard it is for somebody to have to go and try to get justice, and all the barriers they're coming through to get there, and then nothing happened. So sorry, soapbox.
Yeah,
But
no, we'll talk about that next time, because I think you're
Okay.
exactly right. But yeah, it's that trust that was the bridge that said, all right, I'm going to do the things that I don't quite believe are even going to work, because I
yes,
trust Granny.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, you guys, it's very tricky to end something like this, because like, we're not done talking yet. And this is why we wanted to start a podcast, because we thought Rachel has a lot to say about these topics. And I know that you guys are going to have a lot of questions. And so put questions in the comments or email us. We'd love to know what your questions are. If you have any experiences or stories that you want to share, we can share them anonymously down the road. We would certainly love to have new other stories represented here, because this is a community of people who have been through hard stuff, but yet we're getting through it on the other side together. And so I am going to end with an I declare, which is truly just a place to speak life over ourselves as we, close this podcast down and get back into real life, or not necessarily real life, but get back into our day-to-day life.
Mhm.
We don't want you to stay in a place of fear or a place of stuckness. So, Rachel, for somebody who's now sitting there with their eyes open and their mouth dropped, what words of encouragement can you share before I read the I declare?
So don't take this as fear and you need to keep your kids in a bubble and they can't go anywhere. Take it as equipment or tools. Like, okay, now I know. Now I can inform my kids, or now I can give them the tools to stay safe. This is to equip you, not to make you scared.
Yeah, absolutely. And as society's eyes are opened, we can now keep our eyes opened in our communities. And teachers who know will respond. Parents and mothers who can start seeing the signs can respond and take action. And so all of this is helping us live in society even that much better. So next week or next episode, we are going to talk more about the myths of justice, and you're going to hear some stories of what Rachel has experienced and people she knows has experienced when talking to the police, when talking to family, when talking to the church, when bringing it up in friends and with friends, and even really just trying to get help. Because as you can imagine, for somebody who has been told all of this stuff and really has little self-trust, actually bringing it up to begin with is it takes a ton of courage and a ton of bravery. And then to be met with shocking responses is shocking.
Devastating. Yes.
It is devastating. I can't even imagine. We were, one reference to this, if you're interested, is a show called Unbelievable on Netflix. I watched the first episode yesterday and my mama bear was coming out, because I was like, what the heck? And if you want to kind of learn more about the trauma brain and what a survivor goes through in sharing their story, especially trying to seek justice for it, that's another place to go. So
Yes.
all right. Well, thank you guys for listening. We will be back here with another episode, and I'm going to end with an I declare, so we can kind of shake it off and take another step in our day. So I declare God's incredible blessings over my life. I see an explosion of God's goodness, a sudden, widespread increase. I experience the surpassing greatness of God's favor. It elevates me to a level higher than I ever dreamed of. Explosive blessings are here. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email OpenBlindEyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop Sis, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.